Good morning. My name is Dr. Jodie Guest. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist and professor and vice chair in the Department of Epidemiology at Rollins School of Public Health here at Emory University. I lead Emory's COVID-19 outbreak response team working in harder hit communities across the state of Georgia to provide vaccinations and testing. And I am the host of Emory's COVID-19 videos where we cover important topics about the COVID-19 pandemic. On Friday, October 1st, Merck released the first look at interim data from a phase 3 trial for Molnupiravir, an investigational oral antiviral drug that was discovered by researchers at Emory University. Based on the interim data, it appears that Molnupiravir significantly reduces the risk of hospitalization or death in patients with mild to moderate COVID-19. The analysis was conducted by Merck and Ridgeback Therapeutics, which are currently developing the drug after licensing it from Drug Innovation Ventures at Emory, known as DRIVE. DRIVE is a nonprofit LLC wholly owned by Emory that effectively operates like an early biotechnology company and focuses on the discovery and development of antiviral drugs for emerging infections, pandemic threats, and biodefense. In the press release, Merck announced that they plan to apply for emergency use authorization to the FDA as soon as possible. If authorized, Molnupiravir would be the first antiviral pill for COVID-19. Merck's interim data come from randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind trials that were conducted globally across more than 170 sites and included 775 patients. The findings suggest that the drug reduced the risk of hospitalization or death by approximately 50% among adult patients with mild to moderate infection. Around 7% of patients who received Molnupiravir were either hospitalized or died through day 29, and this was compared to 14% of the placebo-treated patients. During the study period, no deaths were reported in patients who received Molnupiravir, as compared to 8 deaths reported in patients who received the placebo. Based on the recommendation of the Independent Data Safety Monitoring Board and in consultation with the FDA, Merck says recruitment to the study is being stopped early due to benefit seen with the use of this antiviral. Formerly known as EIDD 2801, Molnupiravir can be provided as a pill in an outpatient setting, making it easier to distribute across the world. Although remdesivir and antiviral monoclonal antibodies have received EUAs from the FDA, they must be infused intravenously. Molnupiravir targets an enzyme needed for the virus to make copies of itself. The oral antiviral is designed to work by introducing genetic errors into the genetic code of the virus. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, DRIVE turned to broad-spectrum antiviral drugs it had been developing for infectious diseases. DRIVE's CEO and co-founder, Dr. George Painter, had invested nearly 5 years of research with funding from NIH into this antiviral compound for use with influenza. When the pandemic began, they redirected their research to COVID-19 in hopes that this drug could help in treating COVID-19 patients. So it is my pleasure this morning to be joined by the president of Emory University, Gregory L. Fenves. With a career in higher education that spans over 3 decades, President Fenves is a distinguished researcher and educator, as well as an experienced executive leader. He came to Emory in the summer of 2020, drawn by the university's mission to create, preserve, teach, and apply knowledge in the service of humanity. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, President Fenves, to talk about Emory's incredible work and the infrastructure that led to the discovery of Molnupiravir.
Great to see you, Jodie. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So President Fenves, why do you think this discovery happened here at Emory?
This discovery happened at Emory because Emory is an innovative university. Our faculty, our researchers, our scientists look at the most important problems and seek out answers and solutions to them. And there's no other problem that's facing us immediately than the COVID-19 pandemic. So scientists like Dr. George Painter, who you mentioned, who, by the way, has an undergraduate degree and a doctorate from Emory University, their mission is to treat disease, to help reduce suffering, and to save lives. So that's the underlying DNA of the university, so to speak. But it's also, we're organized for these kind of discoveries and these inventions and this development to be done in a university setting at Emory. So if you give me a few minutes, I'll just briefly explain. It begins with science. What are understanding human biology, understanding disease, how disease affects humans, and looking at the fundamental mechanisms, the biological and molecular mechanisms that affect people. So at the heart of it is the science. But science adds to human knowledge. It adds to our understanding. It builds upon itself. It checks itself as scientific results are replicated or not replicated. And that knowledge base is built up over decades. But science alone doesn't cure disease. And this is, I think, where Emory is so special as a university, that a discovery such as an antiviral drug that affects RNA replication is the starting point. It's an essential starting point, but it's not enough. And Emory recognized this a number of years ago to found DRIVE, as you mentioned in your introduction, drug innovation ventures at Emory. So it does act like an early stage startup, early stage development for biological results to see if they can treat disease in a preclinical setting. So it's much more rapid decision making. It's cycling through the laboratory results to check to see if that type of biological mechanism is safe in humans. First of all, that's the most important criteria, and then effective. And so it is a wholly owned nonprofit startup within Emory University to speed those developments, those discoveries from the lab bench to be able to assess whether it could be possible to use as a drug to treat disease. And of course, with EIDD 2801, which was the internal designation from the science to becoming Molnupiravir, that work by DRIVE and Dr. George Painter and his colleagues shows that this type of discovery can be moved into a clinical setting much more rapidly than would be typically found.
That's so wonderful. And as we think about our university, why is drug discovery so incredibly important to Emory?
Jodie, as you mentioned in your introduction, I've only been at Emory 1 year, so I'm learning what is so special about Emory, and that is across the university, in the health sciences, in our College of Liberal Arts, in our professional schools, it is a desire to serve humanity. And that takes place in different ways across the university, but especially in the health sciences, it's just motivating everybody at this time in the United States and this time in the world, how to address this terrible pandemic. And so it is this pipeline from scientific knowledge to discovery to development to actually getting drugs that are safe and effective out and distributed across the world with our clinical partners. So, and this is not the first time, of course. Emory is well known with our scientists like Dr. Raymond Shinazi, Dr. Dennis Liotta, and Dr. Wobing Choi for developing the drug that is essential to treating HIV/AIDS, which is now known as Emtreva. So that was developed in the mid-90s, late 90s, and it has transformed the way HIV/AIDS is treated for millions and millions of people around the world. So this is a model that has worked well at Emory. And one of the things I'm interested in doing as we look to the future is how do we make that model work even better so that we can really serve our mission to help humanity through scientific advances and developments like Molnupiravir.
So what is so distinct about Emory when it comes to supporting research and the way it is done across our entire university?
Well, first of all, we do a lot of research. So this last year, the fiscal year that ended at the end of August, Emory had a record of nearly $900 million in federal grants for federal grants and contracts for research. So the highest in the history of the university. It was about 7% increase over the previous year, that has compounded that rate of increase in our faculty and our scientists and our researchers getting federal grants and contracts that are very competitive. The peer review process to get a grant from the NIH, for example, is extremely rigorous, and that indicates a level of expertise and innovation just in itself in the research funding. But we're also, and that places us number one in Georgia in terms of funding, especially with COVID-19. And that's been so important over this past year and a half of pandemic, is the amount of funding that we're doing to address COVID-19. But we're also in a city and a state that's committed to this. So first of all, our next door neighbor is the CDC, and that partnership between this federal agency that is so crucial to the health of the nation and as a model for the health around the world has been a very big part of what we're able to do at Emory in collaboration with our colleagues in the CDC. But we're also in a city that has other great universities. And as I look around the world and look at where the innovative cities around the country and around the world, you often find clusters of research university. And we have no research universities, and we have no better partner in that than Georgia Institute of Technology, Georgia Tech, which is just about 6 miles away, where we have tremendous collaborations, very complementary capabilities with their engineering and technology, and Emory with its health sciences. And so that collaboration has been terrific to build that culture of research, that culture of discovery and inventiveness, not just within our own campus, but with our colleagues around Atlanta. And I'll just give you one example of that, especially with COVID-19 and partnering not only with Georgia Tech, but our healthcare partners such as Children's Hospital of Atlanta, CHOA. We had a very large program funded by the NIH called RADx to rapidly develop and assess different technologies for COVID-19 testing. And in fact, we're using it on our campus right now, the results of that work. With the testing capability that we were able to stand up late last year in 2020 to serve our campus. But that was just one example of the impact that this collaboration funded by the NIH with Georgia Tech and CHOA has had on ability to rapidly scale up very effective technologies for COVID-19 testing. And then finally, we are in a state that has supported scientific research through the Georgia Research Alliance. Emory is a very important part and contributor to the Georgia Research Alliance. They have helped since that was established again in the mid-90s for key scientific investments. GRA has been very important in recruiting outstanding scientists to the state of Georgia and the universities in Georgia. So we're very, very glad to be a partner with the state of Georgia in the GRA and helping set up the core facilities that have really been important for giving our scientists the tools that they need for these types of discoveries.
It's so much that's going on, and you've alluded to some of this already, but how does discovery fit in alongside the many other contributions that Emory has made during this pandemic?
Well, that's a great question. When I moved to Atlanta in July of 2020, of course, we were in the early stages of the pandemic. It's not over yet, but we were in the early stages. And Emory Healthcare, our hospitals and our physicians that are part of the Emory Healthcare network, were just simply heroic in treating patients and addressing the needs of our individuals and families in the area. And I just have a couple statistics, if you don't mind me, just so we can brag about Emory Healthcare for just a moment. So from February 17th, 2020, right, shortly as the pandemic was beginning in the United States, to September 26, 2021, just a couple of weeks ago, care teams in Emory Healthcare admitted 16,700 patients and discharged 15,400, which was a 93% COVID-19 survival rate over that period of time, nearly 18 months. And independent studies comparing survival rates of hospitals and healthcare organizations in the country and around the world have showed that that's one of the highest survival rates at 93% of any healthcare system in the world. So at the front lines, it was the doctors, it was the nurses, it was the technical staff, the hospital operations that mobilized very quickly, and their care improved over time. They were rapidly learning what worked and how to use it more effectively at the scale of Emory Healthcare. So that's, to me, is the number one contribution that Emory has made in treating very, very ill patients and having most of them survive and be able to go back to their families. But Emory has been working on research and vaccines for decades. And with our Emory Vaccine Center, led by Dr. Rafi Ahmed, there has been fundamental work and clinical translational work that has led to the development of vaccines around the world. And we have been at one of the forefront of many of the fundamental developments in vaccines. But vaccines had to be developed very quickly to address this disease and the impact it was having on everybody and on the country. And as everybody knows, there were some vaccines that were very quickly developed through Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, and a number of others that are still under development. And Emory was one of the leading clinical sites for the Moderna phase 3 clinical trials under tremendous pressure. And one of the reasons that Moderna wanted to work with Emory is because of our track record within the Atlanta metro region of being able to serve patients with their needs. And we have a very diverse population, which is a tremendous asset and benefit for Atlanta. But we know there are health disparities and across demographics. And so it was very important for testing, doing the clinical trials for Moderna and the clinical tests, that we be able to work with patients and of all types and all backgrounds, ethnicities, and races. And Emory had one of the largest and the most diverse clinical sites for the test of the Moderna vaccine, which was very important in assessing its safety and its efficacy, but also communicating to everybody that how this vaccine works and why it's important to take. So we were very glad to be able to do that. And then we've partnered with our health systems across the metro region, especially Piedmont and Wellstar, Northeast Georgia, and then of course Grady Memorial Hospital, the health system there that is so essential to serving the people of Fulton County and DeKalb County in absolutely first-class, first-rate care under many different conditions. And so these have been tremendous partners for us, along with CHOA, in getting the vaccines out. And of course, we're working with CHOA now on the clinical trials for vaccinations for young children. So those are just some of the work in the healthcare field. And of course, Jodie, as an epidemiologist, this doesn't just occur on a patient-by-patient basis. This is a public health crisis that we have had to work our way through. And what better place to be in supporting the nation and the world than the Rollins School of Public Health. So they have been tremendous partners, both throughout Emory, and of course with the CDC and the county health districts across Georgia, and as a resource across the United States and around the world. And so I know your work has been very important in the outbreak response team in providing testing and support around the metro area. And that's just one example that you, Jodie, have helped lead in Rollins's work in supporting the pandemic.
Thank you. I appreciate you calling out my outbreak response team. They're an incredible group of students, and it's been such a privilege to work with them. So Emory is transforming health education, discovery, prevention, and care, and the Woodruff Health Sciences Center is a leading academic health sciences center. So how does Emory's care mission, which is really at the core of everything we do, support and improve Emory's overall research impact for Georgia, the world, everyone?
There are the problems we're addressing in human health, in population health, if we expand beyond individual patients, are very complex. And like problems that are very complex, there's not one expertise that will solve that problem.
Yeah.
In fact, in some of these problems are so difficult, we don't know yet what expertise is needed to solve them. And that's why the Woodruff Health Science Center and the way it's set up within the Health Science Center and within Emory University and many of the partners that I've already mentioned is truly interdisciplinary, because even in thinking through, in design thinking about how to address a problem, you need many different points of view and different types of expertise and disciplines. And that's a strength at Emory and within the Woodruff Health Science Center, especially being able to bring different ideas and different perspectives and create this interdisciplinary culture that is essential to solving some of the most complex problems. So I think that's a real asset. And then, of course, I mentioned already some of the partners. A significant aspect of why the Woodruff Health Science Center has been so effective is that it's the internal partners bring basic science, they bring epidemiology and other public health aspects into a healthcare setting within Emory Healthcare with our 11 hospitals and I think about 2,500 physicians. And so there's a tremendous back and forth, a very positive, virtuous cycle that takes place between the researchers, the scientists, and the clinicians. And that cycle is essential for us to be able to rapidly respond to things like COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the reasons that Emory Healthcare has been so effective in its survival rate. But we want to move beyond that as we think about the next pandemic, and there will be a next pandemic. What have we learned from this one, which is not yet over? So how do we live with an endemic, which is likely what COVID-19 will become? And how do we prepare so that we're not caught as a society short, like what happened with COVID-19, and prepare everybody and our science community and our healthcare community and our public health officials to be prepared for the next pandemic. And that's where the interdisciplinary nature, the bringing the different schools and expertise within Emory and outside Emory with our partners is so essential for being able to answer that type of question.
I think, having Emory set to be prepared to work and prevent the next pandemic is so incredibly important. As you said, we're still living through the COVID-19 pandemic, but we do need to be looking forward to the future. So it is a real privilege to speak with you this morning, President Fenves. Over the years, Emory has invested millions in foundational funding to build a world-class facility for developing drugs for viral diseases of global concern. It's incredibly exciting that Molnupiravir was the result of DRIVE leveraging the infrastructure that's been built here at Emory University. It's clear that having an easy-to-use antiviral will be an important part of stopping the ravaging effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. President Fenves, thank you for joining me this morning to discuss the incredible work Emory continues to do in the fight to control the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you, Jodie.